happening. Thank you all for joining. The topic today is increasing rentals. And I see from the chat, we have people from throughout our region on, most in rural communities. So thanks for being on a beautiful Saturday morning. I've got my video turned off because I'm having some internet challenges. Thanks, Manda, for jumping in. She acknowledged our partners already. I do want to make a note, if you want to be notified of future events, we have a distribution list, and you can sign up on our website. And that's easy to access, and I'm putting it in the chat right now. So rural communities are struggling with housing challenges. We all know that. And building in rural communities is even harder than building in urban communities in many cases, because you've got to bring in materials, you have labor shortages. So there are unique challenges that we face in our rural communities. So that's the topic today. And we're going to have 3 speakers, each of them 10 minutes. And then I do ask that during their remarks, if you want to jump in with questions, put them in the chat and they'll see them, and we can hopefully address them as we go and make sure that they all get answered. I'm going to ask, is Stephen Brown on? I'm not hearing Stephen Brown. Okay, so I'm going to Lisa, I'm going to switch the order a little bit, if that's okay, and have Lisa helps speak first. And I'm putting, in case you aren't familiar with Lisa, I'm putting Lisa's bio in the chat. Lisa is leading a new program that is very exciting on building more rental across BC. So it's a very, very important topic. So Lisa's going to speak. We're going to hear from David Hutniak, who really represents the rental and landlord community across the province. We've had a chance to work together over the years, and I've just been in awe of the amazing work that David does. And then we're going to hear from Stephen Brown, who is the chief of the Klahoose Nation, that's doing some amazing work to produce more housing for their community. So we're going to be hearing about some of the programs that are available and ways that we can get more housing in our rural communities. So I'm going to hand it over to Lisa Helps now. And Lisa, I've made you a co-host, and I've put your bio. Everyone can see Lisa's bio in the chat. Lisa is with BC Housing and leading this program, new program, very exciting program called BC Builds. And before that, she was the Premier's Housing Solutions Advisor. And many of us know her from her time as mayor in Victoria, where she did amazing work. So really, really happy, Lisa, that you made time on a Saturday to share your work with us, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Sadhu, for the introduction. I need the ability to share my screen. I put that in the chat, but when I press share, it says the host has disabled participant screen sharing, and my remarks really rely on a presentation to share with all of you. So, I mean, I could do it without, but it wouldn't be very meaningful. So can I have capacity to share my screen?
Sadhu, you can help do that just by making her co-host.
Yes, I thank you. I thought I did that, Lisa.
It doesn't appear to say so. When I click on share, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So
okay, here we go. I'm going to try again. Here we go. Did that work, Lisa?
Aha, it works.
Okay.
It worked. And also 2 people entered the waiting room during this time. So
thank
all
you.
right. I'm assuming everyone can share my screen or see my screen that is now shared. Okay,
yes.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Just want to begin my remarks.
I'm just trying to shut this down because we've got this one up and working now.
Oh.
I think I got it.
Okay, excellent. All right. Want to locate myself here on Lekwungen territory, and just kind of as Sadhu noted, I'm also on Indigenous land. We're all on Indigenous land, and And as we build housing anywhere in this province, we're always building housing on Indigenous land. And I think that makes housing an opportunity to have conversations about and work towards reconciliation. So I've got my timer going here. This presentation can take me 10 minutes or 35 minutes, depending on how everyone wants it to go. So we're going to try and go for 10. And I will happy to answer questions. So BC Builds is the program that I'm working on. The thrust of BC Builds is to overcome the challenges with building housing in this current environment: high construction costs, high interest rates, limited labor, and so on and so forth. And BC Builds is really meant to be an intervention in this space by using low-cost land, low-interest financing and grants, and really accelerating the building of housing by working together with community in a different way. So as I said, we've got 3 elements to our program. We identify low-cost land for development. Often this is land owned by community partners or First Nations or local governments or anyone who may have land who might not currently be in the housing business as a nonprofit or community entity, but is interested in putting their land forward for housing. So that's our first step: find land, and then bring together the landowners, residential developers, and speed up development project timelines. And then obviously you can't build housing without money. And so we can provide both financing and grant funding to get projects built. So the thrust of our program is really renters to start, which is why I'm here today, but very specifically middle income renters. So BC Builds is not meant to be an affordable housing program. BC Housing has a lot of good housing programs that exist to serve very low and moderate income British Columbians. But what we found when I was working in the Premier's office is there's a real gap right now for people like nurses and teachers and transit operators, construction workers, small business owners, all of those people who keep our communities running, and even with half decent salaries, just can't find anywhere to rent because there simply isn't anywhere. So that's really the gap that BC Builds is meaning to fill. We target at least 20% of the units to be 20% below market. And by having most of our buildings in the hands of the community housing sector, so nonprofits, co-ops, churches, First Nations, non-market actors, even though these buildings start off at market and 20% of units at 20% below market, BC Builds is a long-term investment in the community housing sector and in affordable housing of the future. And the best example to illustrate this is all of the co-ops that people talk about in Vancouver that are so affordable, and co-ops elsewhere as well, but the Vancouver ones really get a lot of play because that market is so expensive. When those co-ops were built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were rented at market rents for working people. And now they're affordable, 40, 50 years down the road. So that's really, BC Builds is a dual intervention right now to get housing built for working people. And by getting it into the hands of the community housing sector, it is long-term affordable housing. So renters is our first target. Second, I've already mentioned, we work with government, nonprofit, and community landowners, help to unlock underutilized land, help develop a vision, timeline, very specifically important. We want to make sure that we're setting timelines at the very first meeting. All right, when are we going to have this building under construction? And we work back from there. And I'll show you how in a moment. We're also looking for creative opportunities to add housing on top of just about anything, so that we're getting the best use we can out of public and community held land. So it could be housing with childcare below, housing with a fire hall below, housing with a city hall below, housing with a First Nations tribal council headquarters below. We're really looking to maximize the use of public and community land. And then again, for those government, nonprofit, and community landowners that may have no idea how to build housing or where to even turn to find a development partner, we've got a platform to help match land with developer builders and owner operators if necessary. And the who is there, but that's just an example. We can work with any nonprofit, government, or community landowner. And then finally, the third target focus of BC Builds is the development community itself, nonprofit, First Nations, and also private developers, as well as housing operators. So we connect these folks to available zoned land, help accelerate approvals to get building done faster, and then working collaboratively to work through the process and remove barriers. And we are open to working with First Nations Development Corps, nonprofit development corps, and private residential developers as well. When the land is owned, when the building is going to be owned and operated by a First Nation nonprofit co-op, municipal housing corp, et cetera, there are grants available. And the grants, and we won't have time to get into this in too much detail, but the grants are not $225,000 per unit. That's a maximum. The grants are meant to get 20% of the units to 20% below market. So whatever that amount is the grant amount for the project, to make sure that each building has some below market units when it opens. I'll just whip through these really quickly. These are some sample projects. There's City of North Vancouver, not really relevant for your context, so I'm not going to dwell on it. This next building is a partnership with the Cowitson Development Corp on reserve in downtown Duncan. Beautiful building. And again, this maximizes the nation's land by having tribal headquarters and Indigenous businesses on the ground floor and housing above. And the thing that the Cowichan tribes love about this project is it serves a dual purpose. It's housing for their nation members, but also there's a new hospital being built in Duncan, and this housing will also serve as housing for hospital workers. And they really see this as an act of reconciliation. Smaller project, maybe more relevant for your context. This is in Gibson's. They've got childcare on the bottom floor and 33 units of housing on top. This is how we do it. People ask, how do you move so quickly on these projects? So up top here is the conventional approach to housing development. Takes 3 to 5 years from concept to construction, works in a linear way. I'm not going to go through it. I'm sure anyone who's been through a housing development process is very familiar with this kind of, you know, a little bit of a plodding approach. What we do with BC Builds, it's a housing accelerator, essentially. We put everything in at the beginning. We bring the land, we work on the feasibility, we're building the partnerships, we're working through the approvals process because the municipalities are at the table with us, and we're getting the financing and the capital stack organized at the same time. So when I drew this up on my whiteboard, it didn't look like a rocket ship, but the graphic designers made it into what I like to think of as the BC Builds rocket ship. So here's the fuel, there's a project team steering the ship, and we spit out construction in 12 to 18 months. And, you know, arguably our program is new. It only launched in February, but we've been working on projects since last summer, and we are set to hit that 12 to 18 month timeline on all the projects we're working on. This is the platform. You can go, if you go to bcbuildshomes.ca, you can look at this. This is where we're matching zoned land with development partners. So we've started off with 8 key priority, and this is really critically important for anyone here that wants to get their site up on this page looking for developer, builder, partner, or developer, builder, owner, operator. The land needs to be zoned. Municipalities have been very supportive. Well, all the land, first of all, that we're starting with is owned by them. But in other conversations we've had with nations who own land in the middle of a city, with nonprofits, the city, we're asking cities to help and towns and villages with city-initiated rezonings just to set the table for what they'd like to see. And then the site can go up here on our housing development opportunities page. There's a map of the province. Each site is tagged. Here's the page with all the opportunities. We hold an info session so the property owners can come and basically make their pitch to the development community and say why they should submit their proposals. We record those so everyone can watch them afterwards. Each property has a property opportunity notice, just an example of that here. And the property opportunity notice is really the opportunity for property owners to pitch their opportunity to the development community. And we have a template, so it's quite easy. And here's the process, which I'm not going to walk you through because this is a 10-minute presentation, not a 30-minute one. But do have a look. This outlines on our website how it works. And just about everything I've shared today is available on our website. So Sadhu, that's me with 20 seconds left. I'll hand it back to you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today.
Amazing. Thank you on behalf of so many communities that need rental housing. I've moved my location, so I'm hoping my voice is coming across now. Not really?
It's not perfect, Sadhu. Maybe go back to turning your video off. It's better than it was, but it's not perfect.
It had a whole bunch to do in the end there with electric cars.
Oh, and then somebody, Bob, can you mute yourself? Oh, I just muted you. Okay, there we go. Sadhu, how's that? Can you try again? the questions are flooding into the side channel here. So I assume, do we get to take questions now, Sadhu, or are we holding questions?
We're going to jump in and have David Hutniak give us an overview of Landlord BC and the work that Landlord BC is doing. And really have asked David for giving us a snapshot of what's happening across the province with rental. And we'll hear from David. His bio is in the chat, and then we'll have a chance for questions. So David, thanks for being here. I know you're visiting your mom right now in Winnipeg, so really you get extra points for sticking through with this presentation. I've worked with David over many years, and I've been in awe of the work he's done to advocate for rental housing that does get upgraded. Many challenges, and that David has been a real pioneer and supporter of landlords trying to upgrade rentals and get more built, and advocating for good quality housing. So David, thanks again, and over to you.
Thank you, Sadhu. That introduction is going to create much disappointment when everybody hears me speak, but nevertheless, yeah, I'm in Winnipeg. I normally live in Vancouver visiting my mom, and I have to admit, I don't know the specific First Nations territories that I'm on, but I do know from growing up here that there are 7 First Nations whose territory is represented here in Winnipeg, I think from a treaty back in the 1870s. And so I just would like to say that it's my honor to be speaking to you today from their territory here in Winnipeg. Lisa really laid out so much information that is in my view going to be extremely helpful for rural communities to try and create rental housing. And Landlord BC, we're an industry association. We represent owners and managers of rental housing. We're member driven, and a big part of what we do, in addition to trying to professionalize the industry and educate and support them, is advocate on behalf of the sector with all levels of government. And also we care a great deal about renters, and we're housing advocates. So it's I've been really fortunate. It's going to be like 10 years that I've been doing this to be involved in the sector. I didn't come from it, and it's been really interesting. I've met so many wonderful people, but I'll have to admit it is a very frustrating work in the sense that we haven't been building purpose-built rental, which is I think the traditional apartments. We didn't build them for literally 40 years. We're now in a place where it's really good that all levels of government recognize that purpose-built rental is the we need to build most of, but unfortunately it's really challenging to build, and the frustrating part is that we missed largely the record low interest rates, and now we're in an environment here where interest rates are high. They're not going to be coming down. We're not going to see those low interest rates again. So it's despite the great work that the province is doing, and certainly the federal government, we're in a situation here where it's extremely challenging, and it's probably even more challenging in rural British Columbia. But in the context of the sector overall, I mean, it's really difficult to be a renter, and it's really difficult to be a landlord. Obviously, renters have very limited choice, and rents are going up. In some areas, at really very scary levels. And also from a landlord perspective, I mean, the cost to operate rental housing, insurance, utilities, taxes, everything has reached a point where the annual increases that we're allowed to advance are woefully inadequate. And so what we're seeing is, which is really most unfortunate, what we call the secondary market, the small landlords with basement suites or investor condos, what have you, they're actually leaving the sector because they're underwater. Now, some of them, unfortunately, and I would say mostly in urban centers, and the condo sector probably over-leveraged themselves with variable rate mortgages. So, in that sense, that those weren't good business decisions, but nevertheless, it is really very concerning times right now from that perspective. what we're seeing, as I already mentioned, and Lisa covered so well in her 10 minutes, she's amazing, is really good moves by the province and the feds, but we have issues. And any of you who have done any sort of advocacy on the housing front, wherever you may be located, and again, I'll say that this is not just my opinion. This is other stakeholders that I work with really closely. But the biggest challenges that we're facing and have been facing for a period of time here is actually with local government. And I'm sorry to be so critical if there's any local government folks here on the call, but the reality is you control the land, the zoning, and the permitting, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're seeing is, unfortunately, is that yes, there's numerous challenges that local government have, but the reality is we're in a crisis. We need to triage the situation here, and we need to get out, think outside the box, and just get things moving. And so this is where myself and other stakeholders that I work with really closely have a great deal of frustration. And what we're really seeing that's most concerning is again, with the good work that the province is doing in terms of what they've advanced, and one of the measures they've advanced is to really put more pressure on local government to get housing built. And what we're seeing right now, we're seeing some municipalities doing an awesome job, but right now we're seeing some municipalities, some large municipalities, in fact, pushing back and I would say undermining the very good measures that the province has advanced. And that's really concerning. And I think, that's one area where, as an advocate, and where I would highly recommend those of you who are housing advocates on this call, I think that's where the work has to be done. It's the province is there, the federal government is there, many municipalities are as well, but a whole lot of them are not. And so my message to you very simply is, you need to go after your local government. There's no question. Their immediate response would be, we have no money. I suppose there's an element of truth to that, but they have land. They have other creative solutions that they can use. The fact of the matter is they can partner with the private sector. The continued demonization of developers, which we've seen for far too long, needs to stop. As Lisa outlined, the provincial government has very much recognized and basically baked into their plan partnering with the private sector to build housing. Developers are just like manufacturers, like car manufacturers. I think you need to look at them from that perspective. And ultimately, so much of what they do is dictated by pension funds and other investors. So the notion that developers are greedy and looking for all sorts of big profits. Well, no investor, no pension fund is going to give a developer to build anything unless the project is going to be profitable. So I think that's really important. And unfortunately, I think many municipalities have still not accepted that, and frankly, many people in the community who like to go and oppose housing, and one of their favorite targets is developers, and I think that needs to change. Finally, one of the greatest challenges that we're having on creating new housing and rental purpose-built rental housing in particular, but it's condos as well, is that the long-held view or history of municipalities demanding growth pay for growth. And if everyone's not familiar with that concept, basically what municipalities want to do, if there's a new project, they want to load on all sorts of costs and infrastructure costs, et cetera, and basically they want that new development to pay for it. Now they think that the developer is paying for this. The developer isn't paying for this. It's the end user, the typically young family who's buying that home, or the new renter that's moving into that new building. And the reality is that this is something you need to talk to your municipalities about. I mean, these are amenities for the entire community. The infrastructure that's being created will help the entire community. And we just cannot continue to expect growth to pay for growth. We need to spread it across a broader tax base. It's critical. It's just not sustainable. Beyond that, I don't really have much more to say. And again, like I said, I think I appreciate Sadhu's kind comments. But yeah, I mean, we're working as hard as we can to try and keep the existing sector viable. That is the affordable rental, but it's very, very hard to sort of continue to invest in it and maintain it. With some of the challenges from a regulatory perspective, but our commitment as an association is to work very closely with the province in particular, but with all municipalities to try and ensure that renters have safe, secure, and attainable rental housing. Affordability is extremely challenging, but attainability should not be. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And thanks for all of your advocacy. How's my audio, Amanda?
It's better so far, it seems like, but not perfect.
Okay. Pam is saying not.
I'll just
not
make,
great.
sorry, that.
There are some questions that have come in. Before I jump to those, is Stephen Brown, are you on? I thought I saw you on, but I was not sure if you were having any challenges. Stephen, are you on? Okay. Well, we'll move on. So there are a number of questions that have come in on the chat, and Lisa, maybe I'll ask you to jump in first. And Hong is asking how the new government RTO program will complement the BC Build program. And maybe Hong, if you're on, you can explain your question for those of us that aren't familiar with the RTO program.
The RTO is the rent to own program. So the government is proposing that with new development that they will supply grants for developers who are building specifically for rent to own. So the rent to own is just a strategy within real estate to help families get into owning a property as opposed to just renting it, but they would rent it for a period of time and then transition to some sort of a mortgage and then take over that property. So like it'd be for like townhouses or condo style builds.
Thanks, that's helpful. Yeah, I was like residential tenancy office. Mike, I was trying to, so thanks for explaining that. Yeah, BC Builds is starting with rental. There is no rent to own program. Now, I think what you're talking, BC Housing used to have an affordable home ownership program. And when we were developing BC Builds, we looked at the opportunity to do a home ownership program and a rental program. And because of interest rates and other stress tests right now, it is difficult to do an affordable home ownership program. So we thought we'd launch with rental. And then what we're proposing probably early next year is to work in partnership with communities and governments to develop what we're calling a pathways to home ownership program. So that could be rent to own, that could be partnering with developers, that could be shared equity co-ops, all manner of opportunities for home ownership. I think what you're referring to is, I think the BC United pitched a rent to own program where government would subsidize developers to build home ownership units, but that's not currently a program of government. But BC Builds will be working on a pathways to home ownership program in future for lots of reasons. And yeah, would really love to re-engage with this group when we're doing that.
Thanks. Yeah, as you can see in the chat, we've got folks from Capital Regional District to Salt Spring to Galliano and Cortes and Vancouver. So it's a really nice diverse group from throughout this region. We would love to reconvene with you, Lisa. I think many of us in our communities are struggling to get rental built. And we do need subsidized rental for a small portion of the population, but we have fire chiefs and we've got people with great jobs that just can't even find rental. And so getting rental built in rural communities is critical. I guess I'd like a question to David and Lisa. Over the years, my time in government, I often find neighbors are fighting against projects in their neighborhoods. And I'm wondering if you're seeing a change to that, if there's greater recognition in our communities that adding rental, a little bit more density in communities is helpful. And I guess I'm kind of interested to understand whether there's a turn that's happened amongst the public generally supporting additional housing. So David, I'll hand it to you, and then Lisa, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, yes and no, I guess. The reality is, certainly, the public hearings in the last couple of years have probably been a little less confrontational in terms of NIMBYs. But having said that, I think if we're looking at, again, I can probably speak best to, the Vancouver in particular, the Broadway area plan, et cetera. And, and now with the measures that the provincial government has introduced, I think we're entering a new phase of NIMBYism. And in fact, it's like I said, we were seeing some acknowledgement that we need density, what have you, but now part of it is, I suppose, a scale of density in the view of some people is over the top, which it's not. And so sadly, from what I'm seeing, it's we're actually entering a new phase of more aggressive NIMBYism, which doesn't bode well. But I think municipalities, some municipalities, City of Vancouver recently, in particular, basically, took a position. No, we need more density if we're going to do this, and so they've advanced some good policy. Although, there are still areas within the city which they're being very protective of. So there's a lot of work to still do.
Okay, David, thanks. Lisa, anything to supplement that?
Yes, and I'm also, because I have to leave at 10:45, I'm also trying to answer the questions in the chat directly,
Thanks.
so I'll continue to do that. Yeah, I think the tide has turned. I know that there are, as David's referred to, some larger municipalities that are just unhappy with being imposed on by government, in their words, and that's fine. They can be unhappy. But I think the majority of the province, what I'm seeing as I work in small places and large places, is a real desire to work differently and collaboratively to get rental housing built in communities, and councils working right alongside us, understanding that their residents, and I mean, this BC Builds, the program's an easy sell, right? Everyone's looking for teachers and nurses and paramedics, and like this is a really big problem that communities are trying to solve. And I think, I'm seeing really, I think we've hit a tipping point in most places. I think the tides have turned, and that
Right.
we're not going to see as much backlash
Right.
from communities or from neighborhoods about having rental housing built.
Thanks. And I see Lisa's been answering questions in the chat as well. So if you're not on the chat, check that out. One of the things we really struggle with in rural communities and cities as well is just the infrastructure costs to support new units, whether it's septic or wells or bringing electric. That's often overlooked, in terms of the costs in a community to build that infrastructure. In a rural environment, that cost falls on the development itself to dig a well and install septic and whatnot. David was talking about those kinds of costs not just falling on the developer. I'm curious, Lisa, and David, are there ways to address some of those servicing costs, that it doesn't burden a project or make that project unviable?
You want to go, Lisa?
Sure. Yeah, I was just answering a version of that question in the chat. So BC Builds has grants and financing for housing, not grants and financing for infrastructure. However, I think that there's real potential with the way that both provincial and federal governments are starting to shift the way that they're thinking about and funding infrastructure. And so the $6 billion housing and infrastructure fund that the Liberals announced as part of their budget, I think is something to really dig into, particularly for rural communities, pay attention to, figure out how it works. They are funding infrastructure that supports housing, full stop. And that is brand new. That's something that's never happened before. No one knows how it's going to work yet. It was only announced in April, but I think that shows that there's at the highest level of government an understanding that we can't build housing without infrastructure. So I would really dig into that. The other thing is, I think the provincial government understands this as well. When there was that big budget surplus in 2023, $1 billion went to communities, unfettered money to spend on building what is necessary in communities to support growth. I think I think we could anticipate if there's another big federal or provincial surplus that we'd see that kind of spending again. Unfortunately, that's not how things are looking right now budget wise. But I think both of those examples show me that provincial and federal government understands that you can't build housing without also investing in communities. And the $6 billion commitment from the federal government, I think, is one to dig into and to look at.
Thanks, David. Lisa needs to leave early.
Yeah.
So we only have her for another
Yeah.
4 minutes. So maybe I'll direct a couple more questions to Lisa, and then we'll get your
Yeah, go ahead, please.
responses. One of our regional directors for Quadra Island, which is a neighbor to Cortes, Lisa, asked a question, Robin, there in the chat, about releasing underutilized land from provincial holdings like school districts or crown land for housing. I know that's one of the areas that they're looking at for housing on Quadra. Any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're working directly with health authorities. I have had one meeting with a school district, so we can work directly with health authorities and school districts to look at building housing on their land. The provincial government itself is doing an inventory of all lands across the province that they think would be suitable for housing. However, obviously, they're not the ones on the ground in community. So if there are sites that are provincially owned crown land that would be good potential candidates for housing, you can, for now, send them to me and I can direct them to Bonnie Roshinsky at the Ministry of Housing, who's working on that inventory project. With any land that's owned by a provincial agency or the province itself, there's consultation and engagement that needs to be done with the local First Nation or First Nations on any crown land. And I think that's an opportunity. As I said earlier, housing can also be about reconciliation. And so that's the first stop with provincially owned lands. Province does consultation with the nation, figures out what their interests could be, looks for housing partnerships. But if it's a school district or health authority, we can start that work directly. If it's crown land, it starts with the province. And I'll put my email in the chat for the folks on Quadra Island. If you've got that particular crown site that you're interested in, send me the details and I can connect you directly with Bonnie.
One of the things, Lisa, that I'm finding, at least on Cortes, we were able to raise the funding to get to get 50 acres kind of right next to the school and the health center and the fire department, and haven't been able to get BC Housing funding through their regular streams. So, and my discussions with many of the rural communities, they have land and they need the support. So your program, I think, will be very welcome among many of us, and really appreciate, I know you've got to duck off. Really, really glad the program exists, because we do need subsidized housing, but we need housing. And over time, rental housing becomes more affordable. It may not be at the beginning, but it does over time. So your leadership, we really, really appreciate. And we would love to engage with you. The BC Rural Center and the Rural Islands Economic Partnership, we're all working together to find solutions to addressing housing in rural communities. Because if we don't, all those folks end up moving to the cities, exacerbating the problem there. So, your program is very important, and we look forward to working with you and finding ways to provide some really good examples of very rural rental housing projects. So we'll be in touch. Thanks for putting your email in the chat and spending a Saturday morning with us. Appreciate that very much. And David, if we can keep you for another 5 or 10 minutes, we'd love to continue the conversation. So Lisa, I know you need to run, but unless you have any closing thoughts, thanks for your time.
Yeah, no, well, just thanks for having me here. Yeah, well, I'm interested very much on working on, we're looking for specific sites and specific projects. So it sounds like there are a couple on this call that would be good candidates. So please, yeah, email me. And I think it's true. Not only will people from rural communities move into cities if there's no housing in rural communities, but I think it's like the kind of societal stakes are worse than that, because rural communities are places where people feel a sense of connection and belonging housing, and that the fabric of community will be destroyed if we don't build housing. So we don't want that either. So just wanted to
Yeah.
put that out there, and thank
Yeah.
you all for all your work and for joining on a Saturday morning.
Maybe Lisa, we could, a small group
Okay.
of us could get on with you and just share a few of the sites that we have. We could have a little working group with 3 or 4 of us just to say, hey, here's some land. How would it work? So yeah, I'll follow up.
That sounds awesome.
Great. Okay. Thanks again.
Okay, let's do it.
Great work.
Perfect. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Great. Thanks. Okay, David, love to put the spotlight back on you for our last few minutes here. And you and I have worked together over the years and have seen projects confront a lot of challenges. The infrastructure being loaded on them, those costs are up to $100,000 per unit is just supporting the infrastructure around. And if you load that onto a project, and then you got a developer that's now facing a lot of uphill battles with the community, it's not a very attractive effort to try to build rental. So yeah, I guess back to the questions that we were just asking, that people were just asking, really curious on the infrastructure costs in particular, but the other questions that we were just talking about, your perspectives there.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that, we reached a point probably 10 years ago where, we had 25, 30 years of basically municipalities building condos, and the condo market was frankly a cash cow for all levels of government, for developers as well. And so we went through a 25-year period where basically municipalities, and I think this was more in urban centers, basically realized that they could load on, pass on whatever costs they wish in terms of development costs, levies, etc. And then the community amenity contributions were created, which is additional, a cost that was added on. But when we were at a boom time for building condos, the developers didn't care because they were just passing those costs onto investors, and investors were prepared to pay whatever it costs to purchase those units. Well, everything changed, really in the last decade, and more critically in the past few years. And so we've reached a point here now where basically to build housing, period, whether it's condos, but rental housing, purpose-built rental in particular, there's just no capacity for all those costs to be absorbed and passed on to the occupiers of those homes, i.e. renters. And so, again, we're fully respectful of the fact that, yes, cities have costs and they have limited access to revenue, it's through taxes, etc. But we need and we're seeing this. I don't want to sound like overly critical here, and we're definitely seeing this recognition that they need to be more responsive in terms of looking at those fees, looking at density bonusing to help reduce costs, looking at ways to expedite proposals that come to them for consideration, because all of those elements increase costs. And now it's not just infrastructure, all those additional costs for a typical purpose-built rental unit in Vancouver, they actually totaled in excess of $200,000 per unit, which is ridiculous. So when you're starting at that point, then you've got all the construction costs and land costs, etc. So when you're looking at this exorbitant cost to build these units, and then people wonder why they're not affordable. So we're definitely in a much better place in terms of the recognition of this, and certainly again the province deserves a lot of credit for that. The Premier and Minister Kahlon, who for really doing a good job in working with municipalities to the collaboration to really look at ways to reduce these costs, to extract these costs. And certainly our friends at Urban Development Institute, who really are the leaders of the development industry, they too have been doing a really good job in terms of having folks and political leaders understand what it costs to build rental housing. One other thing I just want to add real quickly, I know at the end of my brief presentation, I said, our goal is to try to build attainable rental housing, because affordable is very, very challenging. And there was a comment here, if it's not affordable, it's not attainable. I appreciate that. That's that comment. The recognition, the fact of the matter is that, when we look at the broader renter population, definitely there is a significant cohort of renters who, really struggle to pay rent and need support. They need supportive housing. They need nonprofit housing, et cetera, et cetera. The other reality is that there, particularly in urban centers, because of such a shortage of rental, building market rental has huge uptake, because in fact, if you look at incomes on a more broader basis, there are a lot of renters who can afford to pay market rent. And so this is part of the challenge that we continue to have, which is, you go and try to advance a policy, and there's a proposal rather, and there's the looking for the perfect project with all sorts of demands for inclusionary zoning and 20% below market, et cetera, et cetera. And all of this has a cost attached to it. And so the opportunity we're missing is actually building pure market rental housing, because what we know is that there's a huge cohort of renters who, as soon as that new rental housing is built, they are occupying it. And what that does is it frees up the units in those older buildings that have more affordable rental. That this is totally proven. We've had many, economists looked at this, and the reality is that we just need to build rental housing, and we should not be opposing pure market rental housing. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks. Thanks, David. And thanks for your perspectives and your work over time. I guess put you on the spot here a bit. You've been working a lot on urban projects where there's huge headwinds. Most of us on the call are in rural communities, and there's different kinds of headwinds. And I guess, I'm curious, and again, putting you on the spot here, do you have a sense of how the lessons learned in our urban communities might be applied to rural communities? Like there's been just a lot of rental over time built in urban communities, and when I look at the rural communities, all the rentals are really, mostly cabins in the back, a yurt, or like not a lot of purpose-built rental. It's really kind of the leftovers, or a home that somebody's not occupying at any given time. There's not really much purpose-built rental in our rural communities. And I guess I'm curious, do you see any lessons learned that rural communities can learn from urban communities on getting purpose-built rental?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The rural communities are very heavily dependent upon what's called the secondary market, so the basement suites, et cetera, that you alluded to. The other harsh reality is that's the rental universe in British Columbia, because we were building condos for 25 years and not purpose-built rental. Across the whole province, we are still very heavily dependent upon the secondary market for rental housing. And now, it's great that we have the secondary market. We continue to encourage it, but the reality is, from a policy perspective, and that's particularly true in urban centers, but it's also true in rural settings as well, is that in terms of long-term rental housing policy, what governments need to be doing is working more aggressively towards building purpose-built rental, because that provides security of tenure that unfortunately you don't experience in the secondary market, not to the same level in any event. So but I think at the beginning of here, you yourself had said that, you're aware that it's very expensive to build purpose-built rental anywhere. And certainly those costs, aren't mitigated because it's suddenly a rural project. And talking to some of our members who are developers who do have rental properties across the province, they would like to do rural projects, but the reality is that for them to build, say, a 3-story or 4-story purpose-built rental building in a smaller rural center, the economics simply do not work. You cannot justify building, a 40, 50, 60 unit building. It's just not economically feasible. So I think, there's still opportunities here to look at multi-unit housing. And this is where it gets to the municipalities. I mean, what we're seeing in the urban centers is, and the province is driving this, is looking at densifying existing city lots. Certainly what that does is in fact leverage the existing infrastructure. And for smaller municipalities, smaller towns, where they have sewer and water already running to a street, but they're all single family homes. I think it's pretty much critical that if you hope to create more housing and rental housing in particular, you need to densify those lots. That it's not just in urban centers that single family homes are a dinosaur. I really believe that that's true in rural and in smaller towns across the province as well. And so that's probably I don't know if it's a lesson or what have you, but I just think as a housing advocate that wherever we are, we need to look at densification, because that's going to provide some initial economies of scale that brings down costs. And that's going to be an important consideration as to whether or not you're going to be able to convince a developer and or government, frankly, to create that housing. So
Yep.
I think that's the way that has to be looked at more seriously.
Thanks. And David, I know you're in Winnipeg visiting your mom, so thanks for staking with us today. I know I said I'd have you off by 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock your time. So I'm going to close us out here. Thanks, David, for your time. If anyone wants to stay on, particularly folks that have some land in a rural community and you'd like to regroup with Lisa, I just want to again say, David, thanks for your promoting rental development across the province and for your time today.
I should add, I actually I have rural roots. I'm here in Winnipeg, which is where my mother lives now, but I grew up on a farm outside of Winnipeg, and so I have a great empathy for rural communities and across Western Canada here. Certainly, I grew up near a small town called Beausejour, Manitoba. It's probably 5,000 people. And they're struggling with many of the same issues that those of you who live in rural.
David.
I think we lost David. I think
no, David.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I started saying anyway. I'll let you go. Take care.
Well, thanks for your time. And one of the things that many of us are struggling with, David, is our communities becoming resort communities. There's so little rental and so many wealthy people building big mansions. So it's kind of it's a very interesting contrast. And your little town, it would be considered big for many of the folks on the call here. So thanks for your time. If you want to continue the conversation, folks, stay on for another minute or two, and we can talk about how we might want to follow up or any lessons learned from that. But our formal program is over. I'm going to turn off the record, and we would have an opportunity to just talk a little bit about what we heard, and if as a group we would like to engage further with Lisa. As I heard Robin, you kind of indicated there's some land there that she might be able to help with, and a number of us have land that we would like to pursue, and so maybe maybe we could go into it together. So Everyone, you're free to go, but if you do want to stick around for another 5 or 10 minutes to just chat about how we might follow up on getting some rural examples in Lisa's program, that would be you're welcome. So again, I want to thank the Rural Islands Economic Partnership and BC Rural Center and the Cortes Island Community Foundation. I'm going to turn off the recording now. Thanks for participating. And if you do want to sign up for future events like this, please go to our website, cortescommunityhousing.org, to get onto our mailing list. Okay, I'm going to turn off our record now.